Hello everyone, and welcome back to another session of me, Miss Katy, reading JRR Tolkien's The Hobbit. Today, as you can see, there's probably a little bit of theme going along. I am doing a Marvel theme, more like a superhero theme, but I just happen to have a lot of Marvel stuff because I really like Marvel. But I thought it would be kind of fun to do a little bit of a superhero theme because we are going to meet the next character in our story, and they're kind of a little bit of a superhero. In fantasy, there's not really as many superheroes. People have powers or they have magic. This character definitely has a bit of a magical ability. Not like Gandalf does, not like a wizard. You'll see, I don't want to give it away. But I thought it would just be kind of fun to just hang out with some of my Marvel buddies up here. My favorite superhero is actually not even a Marvel character. My favorite comic book superhero is Batman. I was a very big Batman fan. I started reading Batman comics when I was like 9 or 10. And then my husband is a really big Marvel fan. So we've kind of shifted, especially since I'm not a huge fan of the movies and some of the comics that have happened in DC, but that is a completely other topic that I don't want to cover in today's session. So today we are going to start on chapter 7 of The Hobbit, and I think I mentioned last time, but it is actually a pretty big chapter. It goes over 20 pages, almost 30 in fact, so I'm probably going to split this one up like I've done a few of the other ones, and then the next one after is just as long. So this is going to probably be just chapter 7 part 1. Next time we'll probably do chapter 7 part 2 and maybe chapter 8 part 1. We'll see. I'm going to hit about 30 minutes on here and then we'll stop. It's about what I've been doing so far. So I did mention this in the last one. The title of chapter 7 is called Queer Lodgings. We did talk about this a little bit in the last time, but that this book was published in 1937. So there are some terms that they use then that we don't generally use now. Language is always evolving. Meanings of words change dramatically over time, and it's been 80, 90 years since this book came out. So in this, you've heard me say it a few times, queer actually means the same as odd. So it's just odd. It's not really the term that's used now, but I just wanted to kind of let you guys know that nothing about this is wrong. It's just language evolves. If you've ever talked to me, you know that I really enjoy talking about language. So talk to me about it next year. So in the meantime, we are going to start with chapter 7. The next morning, Bilbo woke up with the early sun in his eyes. He jumped up to look at the time and to go and put his kettle on and found he wasn't home at all. If you guys remember the last time, they actually met up with the Eagles and Bilbo had a really good sleep. He had a good meal, but he still deep down is lamenting over the fact that he isn't at home. I think he's having a good time, but at the same time, he wants to be at home so bad. So he sat down and wished in vain for a wash and a brush. He could not get either, nor tea, nor toast, nor bacon for his breakfast, only cold mutton and rabbit. And after that, he had to get ready for a fresh start. This time, he was allowed to climb onto an eagle's back and cling to its wings. The air rushed over him, and he shut his eyes. The dwarfs were crying farewells and promising to repay the Lord of the Eagles if ever they could, as off rose 15 birds from the mountainside. The sun was still close to the eastern edge of things. The morning was cool, and there were mists in the valleys and the hollows, entwined here and there among the peaks and pinnacles of the hills. Bilbo opened an eye to peep and saw that the birds were already high up, and the world was far away. The mountains were falling back behind them in the distance. He shut his eyes again and held on ever tighter. "Don't pinch," says his eagle. "You need not be frightened like a rabbit, even if you look like one. It is a fair morning with little wind. What a finer time to fly." Bilbo would have liked to say a warm bath and a late breakfast on the lawn afterwards would be better, but he thought it better to say nothing at all and to let his clutch go just a tiny bit. After a good while, the eagles must have seen the point they were making for, even from their great heights, for they did not began to go down circling in great spiral paths. They did this for a long while, and at last the hobbit opened his eyes again. The earth was much nearer, and below them were trees that looked like oaks and elms and wide grasslands and a river running through it all. But cropping out of the ground, right in the path of the stream, which looped itself about, was a great rock, almost like a hill of stone, like a last outpost of the distant mountains, or a huge piece cast miles into the plain by some of the giants among giants. Quickly now, to the top of the rock where the eagles swooped one by one and set down their passengers. "Farewell," they cried, "wherever you fare, till your eyries receive you at journey's end." That was the polite thing to say among eagles. "May the wind under your wings bear you to where the sun sails and the moon walks," answered Gandalf, who knew the correct reply. And so they parted. And though the Lord of the Eagles came after the days of the king of all birds, and wore a golden crown, and his 15 chieftains golden collars, made of the gold that the dwarves gave to them, Bilbo never again saw them, except high and far off of the battle of the 5 armies. But as that comes at the end of this tale, we will say no more about it now. So I did tell you at one point that the Great Eagles make an appearance in Lord of the Rings. They save Gandalf from the Saruman's Tower of Orthanc, and then they actually show up at the end of at the very end to help with Frodo. So they kind of show up here and there. They're not huge characters, but it's kind of a fun tie-in that they do, the characters go back and forth. They're in both, so it's kind of fun to see it. There was a flat space on the top of the hill of stone and a well-worn path with many steps leading down to the river, across which a ford of huge flat stones led to the grassland beyond the stream. There was a little cave, a wholesome one with a pebbly floor, at the foot of the steps and near the end of the stony ford. Here the party gathered and discussed what was to be done. "I always meant to see you safe, if possible, over the mountains," said the wizard, "and now by good management and good luck, I have done it. Indeed, we are now a good deal further east than I ever meant to come with you, for after all, this is not my adventure. I may look on it again before it is all over, but in the meantime, I have some other pressing business to attend to." The dwarves groaned and looked most distressed, and Bilbo wept. They had begun to think of Gandalf going all the way with them, and would always be there to help them out in difficulties. "I am not going to disappear this very instant," he said. "I can give you a day or 2. Probably I can help you out of your present plight, and I need a little help myself. We have no food, no baggage, no ponies to ride, and you don't know where you are. No, I can tell you that. You are still some miles north of the path that we should have been following, if we had not left the mountain pass in a hurry. Very few people live in these parts, unless they have come here since the last I was down, which was some years ago. But there is somebody that I know of who lives not far away. That somebody made the steps on the great rock, the Carrock, I believe he calls it. He does not come here often, certainly not in the daytime, and it is no good waiting for him. In fact, it would be very dangerous. We must go and find him, and if all goes well at our meeting, I think I shall be off and with you like the eagles. Farewell, wherever you fare." They begged him not to leave. They offered him dragon gold and silver and jewels, but he would not change his mind. "We shall see, and I think I have already earned some of your dragon gold. When you have got it, that is." After that, they stopped pleading. Then they took off their clothes and bathed in the river, which was shallow and clear and stony at the ford. When they had dried in the sun, which was now strong and warm, they were refreshed, if still sore and a little hungry. Soon they crossed the ford, carrying the hobbit, and began to march through the long green grass and down the lines of the wide-armed oaks and the tall elms. "Why is it called the Carrock?" asked Bilbo as he went along the wizard's side. "He called it the Carrock because Carrock is his word for it. He calls things like that Carrocks, and this one is the Carrock, because it is the only one near his home, and it is the one he knows well." "Who calls it that? Who knows it?" "The somebody I spoke of, a very great person. You must be polite when I introduce you. I shall introduce you slowly, 2 by 2, I think, and you must be careful not to annoy him, or heavens know what will happen. He can be appalling when he's angry, though he is kind enough if humored. Still, I warn you, he gets very angry easily. The dwarfs gathered round when they heard the wizard talking to Bilbo. Is that the person you are taking us to now? They asked. Couldn't you find someone with more even temper? Hadn't you better explain it all a bit clearer? And so on and so forth. Yes, it is certainly. No, I could not. And I was explaining very carefully, answered the wizard crossly. If you must know more, his name is Bjorn. He is very strong, and he is a skin changer. What? A furrier? A man that calls rabbits conies when he doesn't turn their skins into squirrels? Good gracious heavens, no, 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 said Gandalf. Do not be a fool, Mr. Baggins, if you can help it. And in the name of all wonder, don't mention the word furrier as long as you are within 100 miles of his house, nor rug, nor cape, tippet, muff, or any such other unfortunate word. He is a skin changer. He changes his skin. Sometimes he is a huge black bear. Sometimes he is a great, strong, black-haired man with huge arms and a great beard. I cannot tell you much more, though that ought to be enough. Some say that he is a bear, descended from the great and ancient bears of the mountain that lived there before the giants came. Others say he is a man descended from the first men who lived before Smaug, and the other dragons came into this part of the world, and before the goblins came into the hills and out of the north. I cannot say, though I fancy the last of this is a true tale. He is not the sort of person to ask questions of. So you guys can kind of guess what Gandalf's talking about, but Beorn is the next person we are meeting, and he is a skin changer, which in fantasy world, I guess, would be more like a shapeshifter or a werewolf, something like that. He changes into a big black bear, and he is a man, but he's also a lot bigger than men. So he's kind of like this mythical creature a little bit. So that's what I'm talking about. He's more of a shapeshifter. So he's not necessarily a superhero, more like he's like a beast boy or things like that. So so they call him a skin changer. And if you saw what Bilbo asked him, he asked a furrier, which was a person who would sell furs. And so that's why he was like, no. He's not a trapper. He doesn't sell furs. He changes himself. So we'll go on from there. At any rate, he is under no enchantment but his own. He lives in an oak wood and has a great wooden house. And as a man, he keeps cattle and horses, which are nearby, as marvelous as himself. They work for him and talk to him. He does not eat them. Neither does he hunt or eat wild animals. He keeps hives and hives of great fierce bees and lives mostly on cream and honey. As a bear, he ranges far and wide. I once saw him sitting all alone at the top of the Carrick at night, watching the moon sink towards the misty mountains, and I heard him growl in the tongue of bears. The day will come when they will perish, and I shall go back. Which is why I believe once that he came from the mountains himself. Bilbo and the dwarves now had plenty to think about, and asked no more questions. They still had a long walk before them. Up slope and down dale they plodded. It grew very hot. Sometimes they rested under trees. And then Bilbo felt so hungry he would have eaten acorns, if any had been ripe enough to fall into the ground. It was the middle of the afternoon before they noticed that great patches of flower had begun to spring up, all the same kinds growing together as if they had been planted. Especially was true of the clover, waving past patches of coxcomb clover, purple clover, and wide stretches of short, white, sweet, honey-smelling clover. There was a buzzing and a whirling and a droning in the air. Bees were busy everywhere, and such bees! Bilbo had never seen anything like them. If one was to sting me, he thought, I should swell up big as I ever have been. They were bigger than hornets. The drones were bigger than your thumb, a good deal, and the bands of yellow on their deep black bodies shone like fiery gold. We are getting near, said Gandalf. We are on the edge of his bee pastures. After a while, they came to a belt of tall and very ancient oaks, and beyond these to the high thorn hedges through which you could never see nor scramble. You had better wait here, said the wizard to the dwarves. And when I call or whistle and begin to come after me, and you will see the way I go, but only in pairs, mind you, about 5 minutes between each of you. Bombur is the fattest and will do for 2. He had better come along last. And Mr. Baggins, there is a gate somewhere around here right this way. And then he went off around the hedge, taking the frightened hobbit with him. As soon as they came to a wooden gate, high and broad, beyond which they could see the gardens and clusters of low wooden buildings, some thatched, some made of unshapen logs, barns, stables, sheds, and a long, low wooden house. Inside, inside southward side of the great hedge were rows and rows of hives with bell-shaped tops made of straw. The noise of the giant bees flying to and fro and crawling in and out filled the air. The wizard and the hobbit pushed open the heavy creaking door and went to a wide track towards the house. Some horses, very sleek and well groomed, trotted up to the grass, looked at them intently with very intelligent faces, and then off they galloped to the buildings. "They have gone to tell him of the arrival of strangers," Gandalf said to the hobbit. Soon they reached a courtyard, 3 walls which were formed by the wooden house and its 2 long wings. In the middle there was lying a great oak tree with many looped branches inside of it. Standing near was a huge man with a thick black beard and hair, and great bare arms and legs with knotted muscle. He was clothed in a tunic of wool down to his knees, and was leaning on a large axe. The horses were standing by him with their noses at his shoulder. "Ugh, there they are," he said to the horses. "They don't look dangerous. You can be off," he said, laughing a great rolling laugh, and putting his axe down and came forward. "Who are you and what do you want?" he asked gruffly, standing in front of them, towering over Gandalf. As for Bilbo, he could have easily trotted through the man's leg without ducking his head to miss the fringe of the man's brown tunic. "I am Gandalf," said the wizard. "Never heard of him," said the man. "What is this little fellow?" he said, stooping down to frown at the hobbit with his big bushy black eyebrows. "That is Mr. Baggins, a hobbit of good family and unimpeachable reputation," said Gandalf. Bilbo bowed. He had no hat to take off, and was painfully conscious of his many missing buttons. "I am a wizard," continued Gandalf. "I have heard of you, and if you have not heard of me, perhaps you have heard of my good cousin Radagast, who lives near the southern borders of Mirkwood." "Yes, not a bad fellow as wizards go, I believe. I used to see him now and again," said Beorn. "Well, now I know who you are, and who you say you are. What do you want?" "To tell you the truth, we have lost our luggage and are nearly lost our way, and are rather in need of help, or at least of advice. I may say we have had a rather bad time with the goblins in the mountains." "Goblins?" said the big man less gruffly. "Oh, so you have been having trouble with them, have you? What did you go near them for?" "We did not mean to. They surprised us late at night in a pass which we had come to cross. We were coming out of the lands over the west into the countries. It is a long tale." "Then you'd better come inside and tell some of it. It won't take all day." The man leading the way through the dark door said the man leading the way through a dark door that opened out of the courtyard into the house. Following him, they found themselves in a wide hall with a fireplace burning in the middle. Though it was summer, there was a wood fire burning, and the smoke was rising to the blackened rafters in search of a way out through the opening in the roof. They passed through this dim hall, lit only by the fire and the hole above it, and came through another smaller door in a sort of veranda, propped upon wooden posts made of single tree trunks. It faced south, which was still warm and filled with the light of the westering sun, which slanted in it, and fell golden in the garden full of flowers that came right up to the steps. Here they sat on wooded benches, while Gandalf began his tale, and Bilbo swung his dangling legs and looked at the flowers in the garden, wondering what their names could be, as he had never seen half of them before. "I was coming over the mountains with a friend or two," said the wizard. "Or two? I can only see one, and a little one at that." "Well, to tell you the truth, I did not like to bother you with a lot of us until I found out if you were busy. I will give a call if I may." "Go on, call away." So Gandalf gave a long shrill whistle, and presently Thorin and Dori came round the house into the garden path and stood bowing low before them. "1 or 3, you mean, I see," said Beorn. "But these aren't hobbits, they are dwarves." "Thorin Oakenshield at your service, Dori at your service," said the 2 hobbits, bowing again. "I don't need your service, thank you," said Beorn, "but I expect you need mine. I am not overly fond of dwarves, but I believe that you are Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, I believe, and that your companion is respectable, and that you are enemies of goblins and are not up to any mischief in my lands. What are you up to, by the way?" "They are on their way to visit the lands of their fathers, away from the east beyond Mirkwood," put in Gandalf. And it is entirely an accident that we came to your lands at all. We were crossing by the high pass that should have brought us to the road that lies to the south of your country when we were attacked by the evil goblins, as I was about to tell you. Go on then, said Beorn, who was never very polite. There was a terrible storm, and the stone giants were out hurling rocks, and at the head of the pass we took refuge in a cave. The Hobbit and I and several of our companions. Do you call two several? Well, no. As a matter of fact, there were more than two. Where are they? Killed? Eaten? Gone home? Well, no. They don't seem to all have come when I whistled. Shy, I expect. You see, we are very much afraid that we are rather a lot of us to entertain. Go on, whistle again. I am in for a party, it seems, and one or two more won't make a difference, growled Beorn. Gandalf whistled again, but Nori and Ori were there almost before he had stopped. For if you remember, Gandalf had told them to come in pairs every 5 minutes. Hello, you came pretty quick. Where were you hiding? Come on in, Jack-in-the-Boxes. Nori at your service. Ori at... They began, but Beorn interrupted. Thank you. When I want your help, I will ask for it. Sit down and let's get on with the tale, or it will be supper time before it's ended. As soon as we were asleep, went Gandalf, a crack at the back of the cave opened. Goblins came out, grabbed our hobbits, dwarves, and our troop of ponies. Troop of ponies? What were you, a traveling circus? Or are you carrying lots of goods? Or are you always calling 6 a troop? Oh no, as a matter of fact, there were more than 6 ponies. For there were more than just 6 of us, and well, here are 2 more. And just at that moment, Balin and Dwalin appeared and bowed so low that their beards swept the floor. The big man was frowning at first, but they did their best to be frightfully polite and kept nodding and bending and bowing and waving their hoods before their knees, in proper dwarf fashion, till he stopped frowning and burst into a chuckling laugh. They looked so comical. Troop was right, he said, a fine comic one. Come in, my merry men, and what are your names? I don't want your service just now, just your names. And sit down and stop wagging. Balin and Dwalin, they said, not daring to be offended, and sat down on the floor looking rather surprised. Now go on again, said Beorn to the wizard. Where was I? Oh, yes, I was not grabbed. I killed a goblin or 2 with a flash. Good, said Beorn. It is some good being a wizard, then. And then I slipped in the crack before it closed. I followed them down the main hall, which was crowded with goblins. The great goblin was there with 30 or 40 armed guards. I thought to myself, even if they are not chained together, what can a dozen do against so many? A dozen? This is the first time I've heard an 8 called a dozen, or have you still got some more jacks that haven't come out of their boxes? Well, yes, there seems to be a couple more now. Here, Keely and Feely, I believe, said Gandalf, as these 2 now appeared, then stood smiling and bowing. That's enough, said Beorn. Sit down and be quiet. Now go on, Gandalf. So Gandalf went on with the tale until he came to the fight in the dark and the discovery of the lower gate and their horror when they found Mr. Baggins had been mislaid. We counted ourselves and found that there was no hobbit. There were only 14 of us left. 14? This is the first time I've heard 1 from 10 leave 14. You mean 9, or else you haven't told me about all the names in your party. Well, of course you haven't seen Oin and Gloin yet, and bless me, here they are. I hope you will forgive them for bothering you. Oh, let them come. Hurry, come on now, you 2, and sit down. But look here, Gandalf, even if we have now got yourself and 10 dwarves and the hobbit that was lost, that only makes 11 plus 1 mislaid, not 14, unless wizards count differently than other people. But now please get on with the tale. Beorn did not show it more than he could help, but he really had begun to get very interested. You see, in the old days, he had known that the very part of the mountains that Gandalf was describing. He nodded and scowled when he heard of the hobbit's reappearance in the wood, scrambling down the stone slide, and of the wolf ring in the woods. When Gandalf came to them climbing the trees with the wolves, all underneath, he got up and strode about and muttered, I wish I had been there. I wish I had been able to give them more than fireworks. I'm going to pause it just for a second because there's another really nice illustration here that I want to show you guys. So this is titled Beorn's Hall. So he's kind of got a roasting pit in the middle. He's got a table, but he has a very comfortable and nice house. And it seems like whenever the party comes to anything where they have to rest, it seems like it's always a really comfortable spot. And I think that's kind of Tolkien's way of saying this is a safe spot because you know there's comfort there. There's food, there's shelter, there isn't a rocky path on the side of a mountain, you know, things like that. So I really think that he uses these comforting images and of houses and things to tell the reader that this is a place where they can rest. Well, said Gandalf, very glad to see that his tale was making a good impression. I did the best that I could. There we were, with the wolves going mad underneath us and the forest beginning to blaze in places, when the goblins came down from the hills and discovered us. They yelled with delight and sang songs and made fun of us. 15 birds in a 5-fir tree. Good heavens, said Beorn. Don't pretend that goblins can't count. They can. 12 isn't 15, and they know it. So do I. And there Bifur and Bofur were. Bifur and Bofur were as well. I haven't ventured to introduce them now, but here they are. In came Bifur and Bofur. And me, gasped Bomber, puffing up behind. He was fat, and also angry at being left till last. He refused to wait the 5 minutes and followed immediately after the other two. Well, now there are 15 of you, and since goblins can count, I suppose that's all there were up in the tree. Now perhaps we can finish the story without any more interruptions. Mr. Baggins saw then how clever Gandalf had been. The interruptions had really made Beorn more interested in the story, and the story had kept him from sending the dwarves off once like suspicious beggars. He never invited people into his house if he could help it. He'd have very few friends, and they lived a good way away, and never invited more than a couple to his house at a time. Now he had gotten 15 strangers sitting on his porch. That kind of sounds like the way that Gandalf set up the meeting for Bilbo, right? He had one guy show up, and then all of a sudden they started trickling in, and what was Bilbo going to do? He'd already let a few in, so he had to be polite and let the other ones in. So Gandalf, you got to watch out for him. If you ever have Gandalf come to your house, tell him he's not allowed to bring anybody. By the time the wizard had finished his tale and had told of the eagle's rescue and how they had all been brought to the Carrick, and the sun had fallen behind the peaks of the misty mountains, and the shadows were long in Beorn's garden. A very good tale, he said. The best I've heard for a long time. If all beggars could tell me such good ones, you might find me kinder. They may be making it all up, of course, but you deserve a supper for the story all the same. Let's have something to eat. Yes, please, they all said. Thank you very much. Inside the hall it was quite dark now. Beorn clapped his hands, and in trotted 4 beautiful white ponies and several large, long-bodied gray dogs. Beorn said something to them in a queer language, like animal noises, turned to talk. They went in and out again, and soon came back carrying torches in their mouths, which they lit at the fire and struck in the low brackets of the pillars of the hall in the central hearth. The dogs could stand on their hind legs when they wished, and carried things with their forefeet. Quickly they got out the boards and trestles from the side walls and set them up near the fire. Then, ba, 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 was heard, and in came some snow-white sheep, led by a large coal-black ram. One bore a white cloth embroidered at the edges with figures of animals. Other bore their broad-backed trays and bowls and platters and knives and wooden spoons, which the dogs took and quickly laid on the trestle tables. These were very low enough that even for Bilbo could sit at comfortably. Beside them a pony pushed 2 seated benches with wide rush bottoms and little short thick legs for Gandalf and Thorin, while at the very far he put Beorn's big black chair in the same sort, which he sat at with his great legs stuck far under the table. These were like all the chairs that he had in the hall, and probably had them low like the tables for the convenience of the wonderful animals that waited on him. What did the rest sit on? They were not forgotten. The other ponies came in, rolling round drum-shaped sections of logs, smooth and polished, and low enough for even Bilbo, so they were not all seated at Beorn's table, and the hall had not seen such a gathering for many a year. They had a supper or a dinner, such as they had not had since they left the last homely house in the west and said goodbye to Elrond. The light of the torches and the fire flickered all around them, and on the tables were 2 tall beeswax candles. All the time they ate, Beorn, in his deep rolling voice, told tales of the wild lands on the side of the mountain, and especially of the dark and dangerous wood that lay outstretched to the north and the south, a day's ride before them, bearing their way to the east, the terrible forest of Mirkwood. We're going to find out a little bit more of that pretty soon. The dwarves listened and shook their beard, for they knew that they must soon venture into that forest, and after the mountains it was the worst part of the perils that had to pass before they came to the dragon's stronghold. When dinner was over, they began to tell tales of their own, but Beorn seemed to be growing drowsy and paid little heed to them. They spoke mostly of gold and silver and jewels, and the making of such things of smithcraft, and Beorn did not appear to care for such things. There were no things of gold and silver in his hall, save for few of the knives that were made of metal at all. They sat at the table with their wooden drinking bowls filled with mead. The dark night came on outside. The fire in the middle of the hall were built with fresh logs, and torches were put out. And they sat in the light of the dancing flames, with the pillars of the house standing tall behind them, and dark at the top like trees of the forest. Whether it was the magic or not, it seemed to Bilbo that he rather heard sounds like wind in the branches stirring in the rafters, and the hoot of owls. Soon he began to nod to sleep with the voices that seemed to grow far away, until he woke with a start. The great door had creaked open and slammed. Beorn was gone. The dwarves were sitting cross-legged on the floor around the fire, and presently they began to sing. Some of their verses were like this, but there were many more, and their singing went on for a long time. The wind was on the withered heath, but in front the forest stirred no leaf. Their shadows lay by night by day, and dark things crept beneath. The wind came down from mountain cold, like a tide it roared and rolled. The branches groaned, the forest moaned, and leaves were laid upon the mold. The wind went from west to east, all movement in the forest ceased. But shrill and harsh across the marsh, its whistling voices were released. The grass hissed and their tassels bent, the reeds were rattling, and on it went, o'ershaking the pool under heaven's cool, where racing clouds were torn and rent. It passed the lonely mountain bare, and swept above the dragon's lair. There black and dark lay boulders stark, and flying smoke was in the air. It left the world and took its flight over the wide seas of the night. The moon set sail upon the gale, and the stars were fanned to the leaping light. I'm going to stop there since it's kind of a good stopping point after a poem. I don't know about you guys, but I actually really like that Tolkien puts poems in there. He kind of uses poems and songs in interesting ways, because it's not all like about happiness, because you heard the goblins had their terrible, nasty song, and Gollum had his own songs, but then you have these happy songs that the dwarves sing, or you have the songs that the elves sing. So it's kind of interesting because he uses it to just kind of break up the regular passage of time that, you know, everybody sings songs, everybody has their own little tales, and dwarves are no different than goblins in that sense. So I'm going to stop there. We're still only about halfway through chapter 7, but as I've said before, it's kind of a resting point for the party. They're meeting another interesting character in Beorn. He's a pretty cool guy. I mean, he's kind of rough and tumble, but he's a guy who turns into a bear, and he has animals that wait on him like he's Snow White. So, you know, you got to take what you can get. So next week we will start with the rest of chapter 7. Depending on how long it takes, I may just end it there, or I may go into chapter 8. We'll just kind of see. You guys can't really see right now just because you can kind of see, but that's where we are. So we are actually just about halfway through the book. So I'm really hoping that we'll be able to finish by the end of the school year. I know school's out and everything, but you guys are